Right, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce the Open Network for Digital Commerce. This is the next part of the India stack. All of us are familiar with India having biometric identity at population scale through Aadhaar. We're aware of tracking vaccine at population scale through CoWIN, mobile payments through UPI. And so ONDC will do for e-commerce what those infrastructures have done for their respective fields. Now, the goal of ONDC project is to really step change e-commerce participation and make it at population scale. Today, a very small portion of retail is digitally enabled. And if you look at the total e-commerce or total commerce activity in the country, less than 5% is taking place through e-commerce. So most of this country is still doing commerce the physical way. A very small portion is going to e-commerce, and most of that is large urban centers. So if you look at small towns and rurals, they participate, but they make a very little contribution. So from an India perspective, e-commerce is actually a niche activity. It's not a wide-scale activity. People like you and me might partake in it a lot, maybe for a lot of our needs. But from an India perspective, it's a niche activity. Now, how do we change that? We recognize certain issues that are getting in the way of that wide-scale participation. Right? So today, the options for people to be online, at least access scale, are very, very limited. There are just a couple of platforms that will offer you scale regardless of which e-commerce territory you're in, whether you're in household products, whether you're in taxi services, whether you're in food retail. You only have access to a couple of platforms that really have scale. Then these platforms come with their own terms and conditions. So whether it's the commission that they will charge, whether the time it'll take to settle your payment, or other terms and conditions. As a seller, you might have sent a perfectly good product to the right customer in time, and the customer can return it, and you will have to accept it and pay for that journey back, right? And so there are many terms and conditions today that make it infeasible for a large number of retailers. Some people can live with it, and they're already on e-commerce, but a large majority are not. Now, you can do e-commerce outside of these marketplaces. You can build your own e-commerce website. You can build a storefront on the back of, let's say, an application like Shopify. But if you build your own storefront independently, then you don't have access to traffic. And then you have to spend money to attract traffic, and digital acquisition is very, very expensive for those of you who've been part of that, right? And even if you acquire customers to come and visit your website once, why will they keep coming again and again? And so you can get out of some of those issues. You can create your own website with your own terms and conditions, but then you don't have customers. And it is beyond the capability of most organizations, even large ones, to be able to build an entire e-commerce value chain. So how does ONDC solve this and achieve democratization of e-commerce? Essentially through two design principles. The first design principle is unbundling. Okay, now we are familiar with unbundling in many walks of our life. Think about automobiles, right? Car makers don't make their own tires. So they've unbundled that component of vehicles, and they outsource it to somebody else who does it more efficiently. A lot of organizations today get their payroll done from outside. Many brands get their customer service done by a third party. So in many walks of our life, we are familiar with unbundling. But e-commerce, we are used to one entity providing complete end-to-end services, right? Right from the buyer's beginning journey, all the way through the seller activity and fulfillment, we expect all of that to be in one entity. Now that one entity may not be the most efficient, may not be the most effective in doing all the parts, and importantly, that structure comes with certain limitations that holds back the participation, right? So when you unbundle, you allow many more entities to participate. You allow each entity to participate on the basis of its strengths, that they only need to do what they do well, and other entities will contribute their strengths. And like a jigsaw puzzle, all the pieces come together to complete the e-commerce value chain. So unbundling is one important idea. The related important idea is interoperability. If you unbundle a value chain, then the parts need to be interoperable with each other, because if not, then you cannot complete the chain. Now, we are also familiar with interoperability in many parts of our life. Think about banking. Two parties can have bank accounts with two completely different banks, but they're interoperable. Whether it is NEFT, IMPS, UPI, you can send money across, not an issue. If it's international, you will do it through SWIFT. So there are interoperable practices in banking. There are interoperable practices in telecom. Right? You have a phone with a SIM of one company. You can call anybody else in the world who has a SIM of a completely different company. Both the calling and the called party don't need to be in the same operator. Both receiver and senders of money don't need to be in the same bank. But in e-commerce, the buyer and seller need to be in the same application. That's the artificial constraint the e-commerce world has today. And when you unbundle it, make it interoperable, then any buyer can interact with any seller, regardless of which application they're on. So what happens inside a platform, right? Inside a platform are activities. On the buyer side, you have activities like searching for a product, building a cart, making a payment, eventually even checking out and tracking. So that's the buyer side services. Then you've got the seller side services that is about converting the catalog to digital, making the inventory digital, ensuring orders and managing all the cancellations and the customer related activities. And then you have all the warehousing and logistics services. Now inside a platform, all these services exist and they're connected to each other by the protocol, the proprietary protocol that the platform has. So what happens is if you look at two platforms, buyers on one platform cannot buy from a seller on another platform, or seller on one platform cannot sell to a buyer on another platform, right? These are independent, closed universes in themselves. Now what happens when there is an open protocol and open network? We can unbundle this. So you can have one entity doing only the buyer side services, another entity doing only the seller side services, another entity providing logistics services. They are connected through an open protocol that's available to everyone. So anybody can interact with anyone. Now, what does this mean for existing marketplaces and e-com players? They can unbundle and join as individual components. But importantly, it allows many more other entities who are not in e-commerce today, but who have one or more of these components who can now become part of e-commerce. Right? So think about this as a thought exercise. Today's large e-com players, think the ones we consider very large, have a few 100 million users. Right? That's the scale. 100 million, 200 million, that's the scale. Now let's look at a domain that is not e-commerce. Right? Let's look at telecom. The top 3 telecom players in India today, Airtel, Jio Telecom, and Vodafone Idea. Collectively, they have 1 billion consumers. Now, if these 3 telecom players decide to join ONDC as buyer applications, suddenly you have 1 billion buyers on the network. Okay. That's what the unbundling does. It allows participation from entities who are not in e-commerce, but who have the components. So many banks have enterprise customers, right? Millions of them. So as banks bring those millions of enterprise customers to the network, suddenly you have that many more sellers also available. So different entities will bring buyers and sellers, and when everybody is using the ONDC protocol, then you have complete interoperability. Any buyer application interacting with any seller application, interacting with any logistics player, and like a jigsaw puzzle, they're coming together to complete the e-commerce value chain. Now, if you look at the construct in detail, on one side of this entire chain, you have buyers. Buyers will connect through a buyer application. Now, what can be a buyer application? It can be a mobile app, it can be a web app, it can be a web page, it can be a messaging application like a WhatsApp or a Telegram. It can even be a voice-activated device like a Siri or Alexa. It can be an IVR. So it doesn't matter what the form of that interface is, but that's the interface that will understand the buyer's request, be able to search the network for answers, and present those results back to the buyer. Not very different from if you were staying in West End and you wanted to, let's say, shop for local items and eat local food and go somewhere, you will call the concierge, right? And you will ask him for these services. Now, the concierge is not setting up restaurants and running taxi services, but the concierge knows where to find it. So when you make that demand, the concierge finds it, presents you the options, you select and you operate. So the buyer application plays the role of that concierge, and it can be any application that is not even in e-commerce today. The products are classified by category. So if you're looking for a t-shirt, then your search is broadcast to apparel catalogs. If you're looking for a mobile charger, it is broadcast to electronic catalogs. If you're, let's say, looking for cooking oil, it's broadcast to grocery catalogs. And so classified by catalogs are sellers and seller applications on the other side. So depending on what is being searched, it is broadcast to the relevant sellers. The search results come back, get presented to the buyer. The buyer selects, adds to cart, makes the payment, and off they go. So the buyer's journey is no different than any other e-commerce way today. You enter search, you get presented options, you add to cart, you pay, and you're done. But the way it is being fulfilled by these different entities that are coming together on the fly in milliseconds and completing that transaction. Now, each entity can be both a buyer or a seller. How? So you can have a retailer who's selling an item to a consumer, right? Let's say you're selling grocery items, then you're doing a B2C sale to a consumer. But the retailer could be buying those very same items from the distributor. So you're selling in retail, buying in wholesale. Or you could be selling an item and promising delivery as well, right? So you could sell the product in retail, and you could be buying logistics services on ONDC network. So you have your own location as the pickup location. You have your customer's location as a delivery location. You enter those two locations on ONDC, search for deliveries of companies, and you get a delivery solution. So you can have the same entity playing buyer or a seller, depending on what the requirement is. Now, when we began this project with essentially 2 product categories, Kirana as one and restaurants as the other, so food from restaurants as the other. We now also have home and decor. So we have 3 product categories, and we have hyperlocal delivery in 50 cities now available to do transaction. So we are live in 50 cities. We are doing closed user group transactions, so you all will not be able to do those transactions right now. Mumbai is one of them, by the way. And so when we finish the CUG testing, we will expand. But even as we do the testing, we are in conversations with many domains. We're in conversations with travel, with mobility, with banking, with agriculture, electronics, apparel, and all these product categories, even many B2B categories. So B2B logistics, B2B supply, and accessories. So many categories are already in conversations with us. And in the coming weeks and months, you will see more such categories coming live on the network. Now, when everybody is live on the network, what does it mean? Can there be use cases that are different from today? Indeed, there can be. Right? So think about somebody who's based in Bombay, who gets assigned to a role in Kerala for a year. Now this person wants suitcases to pack their stuff. They want a flight ticket to get there. They want to stay there for a year, so probably want a service apartment. And they don't know the local language. Let's say they even want to learn the local language. Today, those 4 needs will have to be fulfilled 4 different ways. You'll have to go to a marketplace to buy suitcases. You'll have to go to a travel portal for your flight booking, or maybe the website of an airline. You'll have to go to a hotel app or an accommodation portal for your accommodation, and maybe do a Google search for people who can teach you lesson and connect on email or phone, right? 4 different needs, 4 different platforms, 4 different journeys, 4 different checkouts. Now, on ONDC, all can be done through a single platform. Add suitcase to cart, flight ticket to cart, hotel to cart, lessons to cart, checkout, and you're done. So that's really the revolution. I'm out of time, but that's the list of brands that are currently live. So 8 are live in these initial cities. Another 16 will come live fairly soon. More than 200 companies are on their way to going live on the network. So if you are in any part of the value chain, you have a buyer universe, you have a seller universe, you're a technology service provider, talk to us. This is where you talk to us. Write to team@ondc.org, and we'll help you get on board this new transformation. Think about UPI for payments. ONDC will be for e-commerce. So look forward to having you on that journey. Thank you.